I'm about to say, I'm still looking at my light. I'm like, oh,
hey everybody, welcome to LaKesha and Friends, and I am so excited to have my sister friend, Reverend Amina McIntyre. Yeah, so it's a lot going on, and we're just gonna have a little conversation about it because I feel like I need to talk to somebody right now. So happy that it's you today. So introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Now she knows that this is really a test. So my name is Reverend Amina McIntyre. I am an Atlanta native all day, every day. I am a playwright, a minister. I am a scholar. I am someone who very much considers the intersection of spirituality and the arts, and doing a lot of work also with care. I do part-time chaplaincy work. And I am also the president of the Connection Young Adult Ministry for the CME Church. This is our, we call it our super senior year, thanks to COVID, because we didn't get a chance to do our election. So we're hanging out for another year doing some work. And yes, I think, and I'm also, I guess I should say this because, you know, always the plug. I also do retreat and prayer boxes at Take a Day Retreat. And so check those out. I always will do a little plug for those. But yeah, so that's what I do.
Well, you know, I'm just going to interject this, and you have a little time to work on it, but you definitely need to come up with a prayer box for this upcoming election, because I have a feeling that like those would sell, because we definitely are going to need some quiet time and some woosah, because that was one of the things that you were talking about, that you all have an initiative around praying, not only before the election, but even after the election. So tell us a little bit about why that initiative is important to you all.
Okay, sure. So, it's very interesting because typically everyone's like, okay, let's do our thoughts and prayers and let's do some praying. And for me, because our denomination is doing a series of call to action workshops and worship services. There's like a 4-day event that we're doing next week, Thursday through Sunday. And each of our different boards are coming together to do some unity. But it actually was a pitch of my secretary, Toya McQueen. We were talking about some things that we were wanting to do. And we do a CME's vote campaign almost every other year at this point. So it's something, the hashtag will actually start popping up in probably a couple days. But this year we were like, you know what, this has been a lot. And she was like, I know we don't do a lot of, I know people, it seems cliche to pray. She was like, but we're Christians and this is a hard time. Yeah. So why don't we do some days of prayer before the election and some days of prayer after? And I absolutely co-signed the support, because I was like, you know, we really haven't started thinking about the care that we're going to need from the trauma of what we've been seeing for the whole year. Not only do we have a pandemic, not only are we protesting, but now even with the most recent debate is what is formally supposed to be called last Tuesday.
The train wreck.
Oh my God! Like
the train wreck of 2020 is what we should call that.
Exactly. You know, and then even this, and even to that end, this morning, between last night and this morning, the fact that there are reports about our president getting coronavirus, and half of the people were like, well, serves you right. You know, the fact that we are at that point is toxic and traumatic. And I think that we need to name and call that out. I think we need to actually have conversations about the fact that that is something that is in our lexicon, and something that, God, if you go to Twitter today, they are having a field day. And so I feel like at some point, regardless of what happens with the elections, we're going to need some time to debrief, and we're going to need some time to really talk this all through, because this is not normal. And we are really responding. And when we finally realize the trauma that we've really been through, a lot of us are going to have a hard time. And right now, there aren't any full systems in place to really deal with the depth of the trauma that we're going to have to unpack.
Yeah, and I think like that is so interesting, because I was on Twitter this morning, and just some of the comments from people like, you know, I hope he dies and it serves him right. And it's like the fact that, you know, that is the opinion of so many people about the president of our country. Like I saw a lot of like hatred and disdain for President Obama, but like, I don't think it was ever like this bad. And we don't think about like, what is that doing to us spiritually and mentally and emotionally? And how do we, and you made a great point, like how are children perceiving all of this. So talk a
Absolutely.
little bit about like, some of the things that you hope we'll do with like young people in this time.
Sure. That's a really good conversation to bring up. So one of the things that we talked about before was that in our 4 days of the call to action, we're trying to give voices of youth and children to talk about what they're seeing, because even though most of the youth and the children cannot vote, the fact is that they are learning about the democratic process, because in social studies and civics, I remember when I was in elementary school, I knew the democratic process.
Right.
Know all of it now as well as I definitely don't know as much as I did when I was in 5th grade. But I was even saying that, like, I remember I'm doing a mock vote in 5th grade when Bill Clinton, oh boy, I just dated myself. When Bill Clinton was elected, and being like, oh, and the room being like, oh, well, this is why we choose Bill Clinton, and these are his policies, and these are the things we know. And so I think about the fact that, especially with youth and children, is so important for us to consider, because at the end of the day, the votes and the moves that we're making right now impact 5-year-olds,
right,
and what their lives are going to look like in the next 40 to 50 years. A lot of us aren't going to be around for 40 to 50 years. And so we might be arguing over things now. I mean, even our presidents, and both of the presidential candidates are over 70. They're not going to be around realistically when a lot of the policies and a lot of things that they've put into place really show their impact, because it takes about 10 years or so to really see how everything has really interwoven in the system. It's just like right now we're seeing like the effects of gentrification from because of what happened in 2008 with the housing, when everything crashed and everything turned over with mortgages and such. And so I think that we really have to think about, one, the impact that it's going to have on children, but two, also talk to children and youth and say, hey, what is your opinion about what's going on? Because I know you have one. I think we often just kind of discredit children and youth and say, oh, you're just growing. And I'm like, yeah, but far more observant, far more really kind of observing everything that we're doing and in taking this. And so how empathetic can they be as they get older if they're seeing how we're having conversations about our president now?
Right.
And whether we think he deserves it or not is irrelevant, but what is it doing to persons to do it? And children are also on social media. They use it more than we do, even in classrooms. And you can best believe that even in Zoom class, especially if someone had a social studies class this week, that they talked about the debate and they talked about what's going on with the election, and talking about even how October is going to go now, because now how is the process going to go if our president has COVID? Can he participate in the next couple of debates? Because there are 2 of them coming up. And then the vice presidents, do they need to go into quarantine? Like, how's it going to work? And I just feel like there's a lot of things that just feeling wise that we just, I think that we're in a large way, sometimes we're starting to desensitize ourselves from so many things. And that desensitization is going to take a toll on our bodies.
Yeah.
And in our own health, and also in how we start to care and treat each other. And it's going to show up. It's already starting to show up, but it's really going to show up in the next month or so, I do believe.
Yeah, because the past week has just been really stressful, and it's only Friday, and it's like between like the debates and the COVID announcement, and you just kind of wake up every day looking at the news, and you're just like, yo, like what is happening? And like you said, like kids are very aware, because I have a 14-year-old and he's on social media and they're talking about it and having discussions. And so when parents think that like they're not engaging their kids, like if you're not engaging your kids are engaging with each other. And so we need to know like how they're processing what they're seeing, because I do believe it's going to have an impact on how they participate in the process when they get older. Do they look at what they're experiencing now and they're just like, you know what, I want no parts of this, and then have another generation that has even lower voter turnout because of everything that they've experienced? Or do we help them to understand that this is not normal and we need you to participate and understand the way it's supposed to work?
Right. I mean, and I would even say to that point, it's the reason why Sesame Street did their town halls when the pandemic started and the protests. Yeah. And people are always like, did you watch those? I was like, yes, I'm an adult and I watched them. Because they were the most informative pieces of information. I actually have referred people back to it like recently. They're like, well, how do I explain this? Go back to the town hall. And so Sesame Street's going to have to do a town hall, seriously do a town hall on the democratic process and what this election looks like, because they're the only people talking about, hey, this is a problem. Like, can we team up with CNN again and do this? See how we can break it down for people. But but without interventions like that, it's going to be, we're also just going to have to rethink care and what care looks like. And we have to rethink care in an ever-changing world. And I know that sounds cliche, but 2020 has changed the world so dramatically that we don't even know yet the fallout of all of it.
I know, and we still have 3 months to go. It's like, I just imagine us like limping across like December 31st into January 1st. Like, thank God we made it, and prayerfully like, things will be different. Which is interesting because like, and just, side note, like people are just like, 2020 is like the year of like clear vision, or, and I'm like, yeah, like God is showing us like everything right now. Like for everybody who wanted like perfect vision, like and it's just like, so much stuff has manifested, and even in the political process, just showing us how important it is. So tell us a little bit more about like some of the voting initiatives that you guys are working on, and what you're doing to really encourage people to get out and vote, and why it's important.
Right. And so over the past 4 years, we've actually made it a tradition of ours to do encouraging videos to try to get people to go out and vote. We do a lot of social, of course, since we're connectional, we serve not only the U.S., but also abroad. But especially when it comes to the U.S. elections, we've always done, hey, here's this hashtag. Hey, here we're passing this along. Hey, we're doing these things. We've also encouraged people to look at their local churches to see how they can help with local churches. So we often have reports of, in addition to saying, hey, I voted, we also have people reporting that they'll take other people to the polls, or they'll report back about what's going on and how you can do this, or they'll say, hey, I'm taking snacks. Or I've actually seen a lot of my friends this year sign up to be poll workers, not a poll worker, but to work. But I always think it's funny to be like, yeah, poll workers. But there's a lot of people who are signing up to say, hey, I'm going to take the day off and I'm going to learn how to do this process. And since the lines are so long, I want to help, the persons in there to do that work. So we're encouraging those things. The call to action in particular is a 4-day conversation, as I mentioned. And so our Commission on Women in Ministry is going to go on Thursday. On Friday will be our lay department, and they're part of their panelists are trying to have, I don't want to officially say it yet, and just in case it's not all out there, but they're trying to get some of our political leaders who are CME, who they can get a hold of to kind of talk about some things, and to just kind of be involved with the conversation. On Saturday night, we are doing just kind of a variety. It's almost more like a documentary, really, where we're just having pre-recorded conversations with a lot of different kinds of people and talking about the right to vote, not only the right to vote, why it's important to vote, but we're also going to talk to people who can't vote. Ooh. And so that's the youth and the children and persons who have a felony on their record and cannot participate in the process, and how that impacts the local church and how that impacts the conversation. And then also we're trying to, and we're still working some of this out, but we're also trying to talk to people who have decided voting, they don't see the value in voting, because I think those are the conversations we don't have. Right. And I think and especially in this month before the election, this is the time to have those conversations about, why do you feel like you shouldn't vote? And what does it feel like to say, what, my right at this moment, I cannot exercise, and I feel that it's so important to do so. But those are just conversations we don't ever have. We just kind of assume, oh, you stand up, sit in line for a chicken sandwich, but you didn't go out to vote. But I have pictures of the last time I voted, when I waited 5 hours in line to vote. And and so we all, and I went on the last day of early voting. It was not even election day. It was the last day of early voting. We got rained on. They had to bring us snacks and water, so that's what happened just around the corner. I live in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And so, and when we got in there, we just saw that they just didn't have enough in there for the amount of people who had come out. And so having that conversation too, about saying that, hey, the assumption that people aren't voting or aren't dedicated to it is really kind of a myth. And I also I'm not gonna lie to you, I loved what Martinique said a couple days ago about people coming out and having to bring cake and be like, hey, come on out with me. I mean, I think that, I think that's part of it. I think that's there. On one hand, there are some people who say they don't want to vote, but I think also having to have the conversation about the fact that, hey, there are also people who are voting, dedicated to voting, running for positions, and they need your support. But also we try to overlook them because we feel like only a certain demographic is voting. But when those numbers come back and we see who actually really voted, then we're like, well, we did our work. So
right.
To do. But anyway, so the point is that, so those initiatives, so we're going to do our CME's vote hashtag, and that's coming up really soon, and we'll probably partner with the other denominations as we've done in the past. We'll do the call to action, vote for next, call to action work. We'll also do the prayer, as I mentioned before and after the days, just to kind of help relieve us. And also just trying to help support. We'll be sharing information about helping people with their polling things, sharing ways that you can kind of support people, and also saying, hey, local churches, think of, things you can do. If your church is not a voting site, how can you help rally people together? How can you encourage people in the local community? Because our board has really been more focused on trying to activate people in their local community more, and in the local church more, because the connection will take care of itself. They will probably call me about that statement later. But I do think that part of the connections job is to empower the local church and to give the local church options and to let them know that we're not the only people support, that they're not doing it by themselves, that there's another wider network of people doing it. And so that's kind of what we're really trying to hope to do this time.
Yeah, and I think that that's so important because so often I found that churches focus more on making sure that their congregations and their people vote. And it's like, yeah, that's wonderful. Like, pat on the back. But those people out there that don't typically vote in your community, like that's where we need to focus our energy. And absolutely. I just don't see that we have enough initiatives along those lines because we're always like, we got to get us to vote. And the reality is like most church people vote. Like, most church people vote, but it's the people who are outside of the church that, and it's almost like even when we have programs and we invite other church people to our programs, and it's like, yo, but what about people who don't come to church? Like, why don't we do stuff?
Right. Or why don't we just invite the people in our community? Because most of our churches now are commuter churches.
Right.
But how many people, as I remember when I was a child, going around the corner to different people's houses and being like, hey, I'm too early for Sunday school. Let me take a nap at your house before Sunday school. You don't have that now, but in the same time, we haven't cultivated the community around our churches unless we're giving away backpacks so we can say we did something great, or giving away boxes of food. But have we actually really, to your point, gone in and been like, hey, we're going to be taking people to the polls. Which poll do you need to go to? Do you need a lunch? Do you know your rights for work, that you can get 2 hours off to vote because it is your legal right to do it? You know what I mean? Do you know those things? And how I think that would be an interesting initiative to empower the community and say, this is what the community needs. This is what my particular community in my church, even in COVID, how can you do that? Because it can still be done.
Yeah. So I think the initiatives are so important because we have to be more strategic. And I think in the past, it's just been kind of trying to guilt people into voting, like your ancestors died for you to have the right to vote. And part of this series has been like, what else? Like, all right, so we understand that, but what else can we do to help empower people and to encourage them to get out and vote? And it's not just about the presidential elections, but even what we're looking at in Kentucky with the attorney general. It's like, that is not only happening in Kentucky, but how many other states have, we elected attorney generals that are just really not working on behalf of justice for all citizens. And people put so much emphasis on Kamala's record as attorney general. And my question was, okay, so what about your attorney general? Like, do you even know who your attorney general is? Do you know what their prosecutorial record is? Like, we have to be more concerned before they get to nomination for vice president about their records.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and even with that, for example, too, and I'll say this because this just happened in Georgia. So John Lewis was still on the ballot, and I voted for him before he passed away. Right. And so you also have people, because you have to really think about succession plans. So who would have come after him? And so they just had a special election on Tuesday to vote for a seat. But even with that, the person who is doing a special election, because they have an election in December. I think the person will get appointed to December, which means they have 1 month to serve before the next person comes in. And on November 3rd, we're voting for someone completely different because they couldn't run in that special election to fill his current seat. So it's all this.
That's crazy.
Right. And so I think that there's a lot of tenets, because not only is it knowing who these people are, it's also saying, hey, we need to start going back and handpicking and training people to do the work.
Wow.
And instead of saying, like I said, I think that we can graduate people out of their current positions to be advisors and to be spiritual leaders. And I think that, especially in Black communities, this is the first time we're really starting to say, hey, you know what? We have all this longevity. So now but we have first generation persons who are in longevity. And
Right.
so it's like, so if that's the case, then how do we teach those persons to really start coming up with succession plans? Because, now I'm going to get real political, and I ain't trying to be, but it's like, who's Al Sharpton training to take his spot? Who is Jesse Jackson training to take his spot? The only person who's done it the best, I think, is Merle Evers, because when she did with her, the work that she was doing, she handpicked someone else to take over. She helped train that person, and she's like, I'm going to go off and write. But we're not doing that enough in all of our communities. And so as we're losing our leaders, the problem is we haven't instilled a good way of training people to take it over. And we're saying people aren't interested, and that's not the case. Because even with SNCC and SCLC, they were training people since they were kids to do this work. So by the time whether their parents were there or not, because we have this myth that, parents have always been there, and so the family has always existed the way it is. It's such, our families have been broken for a long time. But at the same time, that didn't stop you from taking other children and starting to teach them the process, and just using as a cop-out that, people have video games, I think is just a cop-out. We really have to take more responsibility and hand training and hand picking the next people, not in hierarchy, but giving people the tools they need to take care of their stuff.
And I think that's so interesting, because as you were talking, like, I was thinking about like a lot of the programs that train people for like political office. And, there's like the Women's Campaign School, there's like Emerge, and, Higher Heights does some training. But when you think about, like, are there any like church groups that actually do training for Christian leaders who want to serve in public office? Like, I just don't know of any programs like that exist. Yet we want our Christian values to be reflected in legislation. But it's like, but if you're not training your Christian leaders to operate in that space, then how do you expect to get those types of leaders?
Absolutely. But also too, we're not training them to take a lot of interest in even how our churches work, especially denominationally. Because even when we did General Conference in 2018, we had to train all of the delegates. And because they were like, we're going to have all these young adult delegates. Great. But do they know what they're doing? Do they know what they're getting into? And so, but we as young adults were like, we're going to take it amongst ourselves to pull people in and ask people to train us to do this work. But for the larger elections, even though you have some people who are like, hey, they're trying to push for this and the other. But you're putting people in place who don't know Robert's Rules of Order, or you're putting people in place that you haven't said, hey, let's sit down and do this. And hey, there's some YouTube videos on doing Robert's Rules of Order for the church, or YouTube videos for your community, or even just celebrating the little wins. Like, we had someone here in Georgia who just got on the school board, and he's a young adult. And so it's just like, just trying to celebrate that, and also saying, hey, this is happening. But that training is a key piece. And at the end of the day, we can point fingers all we want to, but the people who tend to train us are supposed to be the elders.
Right.
So, and the elders have to be willing to give the knowledge. And there are people who do want to learn. I'm tired of people saying that they aren't here. We here.
Right.
You have to teach us what it is.
Yeah, it's like the person who was just elected to the school board. Like, how awesome would it be if they decided to do a training for other people who were interested in running for school board? Because some people might be interested, but it's like, what skill set do you need to have to be successful? Because if you don't know how to read a budget, if you don't know how to, read policies, if you don't understand how that works, then you can be a great person and get elected and not be successful, and then you end up not getting reelected. So it's like, what are we doing to help people who want to run for office, but also to help them to be successful in that position?
Absolutely. So, because getting in one term and not making it work, and then not able to get in for more than one term, is another thing too. Because it is a multi-layered process. And then how do you do multi levels of support in that, because we're also quick to say, oh, we got this person elected. But
Right.
then don't support the person when they're in office, and don't interrogate them, and don't hold them accountable. So I mean,
we say that like we didn't financially contribute. We probably didn't go to the area to vote. So it's like we got you elected just because we're in the same denomination. But it's like, yeah, but do we really support their campaigns? Like, are we really like, even there's like the Black Church PAC, and do we have like PACs that we're supporting that can support the candidates financially? So I think that there's a lot of work that we can do around like supporting those types of initiatives so that we do have good leaders to choose from, because this goes back to your initial point about our two presidential candidates being in their 70s. And you look at Maxine Waters, you look at Nancy Pelosi, you look at Al Sharpton, you look at like all the people that we're kind of like hanging on to be like the voice for us. And these people are like knocking on 80. And then you look at like who's coming behind them, and there are a few people, like you got AOC, you got Lauren, I think her last name is Underwood, maybe. You have a few people, Ayanna Pressley. You have a few people, but like, do we have a deep bench that's going to be able to replace these people? And what are we doing about that?
Right. And also too, and the other part becomes too, is that how do we graduate people who've been in positions for 50 years over to their next part of life, and it not feel like a demotion? Because I feel like we have a way of really kind of jumping. We have an issue with too young and too old. And we don't have places for either in the conversation. And I think we need to be able to open up the conversations more and talk about, okay, so these are your options as you get out of this particular active part of your life, so that you can still be active in this process, but yet still also touching and, kind of working with more people. I mean, and I think that's something it's really succession plans and strategic planning at its finest, which we don't do well. Honestly, we tend to, in our strategic plans, focus only on the active groups, but we don't tend to focus on the persons who are maybe a little older than the active group, or persons who will become active within the next 10 to 20 years.
Right. That's so interesting, because I was just thinking, like, in the church, like, 50 is young. Like, I have people who are all the time like saying like, you're too young. And I'm like, I'm 43. Like, in most sectors of society, I'm considered fully grown. But when it comes to like leadership, like, if you're in your 40s, like, you're too young to lead. Like, you got to wait till you're in your 50s and 60s. And it's like, by that point, I should have already like made some contributions and be at the position where I'm grooming the next. And I think like that might be part of why we don't do that, because people don't get their shot until they're in their 50s and 60s. And so they're trying to maximize the opportunity that they have, so they're not as willing to groom a 20-year-old, because it's like, I just got here, so I'm trying to, get my work done, and then we don't have like someone to come behind them to do the work.
Right. So I mean, and I've been saying that for a long time, because in our denomination, in CME Church, we're 18 to 35, and even when they were like, we're going to extend the age, and I was like, don't do it to 40, because I mean, my thing is just like, I'm technically out of the range now, and I'm just like, I wouldn't have wanted to run again, because I feel like somebody else needs to come in with a fresh vision and just kind of see, because sometimes I think that's also part of it. It's just like, we occupy positions, and it's great for longevity to a certain point. However, and I tell people all the time, like, look, I'm like the old woman on my board. Like, all of my folks, they Snapchat and tweet and TikTok.
I'm not doing that. Right. Yeah, because when I was served as a young adult chair, we were 22 to 40. And I think I was 40 when I came out of office. And I was just like, where I am at 40 is totally different than where people are who are in their like early 20s.
Absolutely.
And so, there may be like some internal mentoring that we can do. But like you said, like, people are like, are you sad to leave office? And I'm like, no, like, it's my time to leave. So this group of people who are in this 22 to 40 age group, they can work amongst themselves. Like, you don't need me in my mid 40s, like, trying to tell y'all like what you think is fun, because and what I want to do, like, it's just not the same.
It's not, and it's okay. And I think that's the other part. Is just like saying, hey, we have a variety of people. We have a variety of likes and differences. And at the same token, I'm like, you know what? If you need me to serve like I would want to give myself some distance from the next board just so that they have their opportunity to kind of be themselves. But if you need some help, call me. Oh, this is what I did. I can't tell you how to do it, but these are several strategies that I've known other people to use, and this might help in a way in order to kind of groom you leadership wise. Or here, read these books, because these are books that help me along my leadership journey. Or talk to this person helped me in this way. But I think that sorry, I'm moving my little thing out. But I think that's part of it, is just, because we have to start thinking about ourselves in the next phase of our lives. For example, as a playwright, and I'm a playwright, and I'm like, you know what? I have some local plays I do. I get commissions. It's great work. I like having my own buzz, but I really want to be a producer, and I want to be able to give grant monies, and so I'm repositioning myself now to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'll always still write. I love writing and I like the production process. I'll always be involved, but how can I put other people on? How can I also say, I'm making money from these projects, so I'm going to give, $500 or $1,000 little grants to my friends who are making money. Who are doing their work and are starting from absolutely nothing, so how can I be like, how can I pay you something to do your work? And so, but I've started to have to think about saying, instead of me being the one always asking for a grant, saying, I want to be a person providing those grants. And what does that look like? And so similarly in our church, and we're talking about community, we're talking about voting and talking about all those kinds of things. We have to imagine ourselves in positions that don't exist yet, because other people haven't necessarily done it. And so for me, it's just like, this is great that I've done, presidency for 4.5 years almost now, but I would love to see how I can be someone to help people develop and grow their ministries. I would love to talk to people and walk people through, this is how you put together a budget, and this is how you raise it early enough, and this is how you develop an event early enough so that it actually gets some traction and it moves some people beyond what you're doing. And yes, take a risk and don't just use Zoom for this project. Use StreamYard or use Hopin or use something else. And so it's just like, how can you, and I would love to create spaces for people to just have imagination and to imagine how they could work, instead of saying, oh, this is the only position that I'm in. Because I think that we don't use our imagination enough, but that's also means that we have to think prophetically and creatively and allow God to really show us and give us visions and hear the visions that God tell us, and not just put our visions aside because we think it's political. Because there's so many people who just operate not in their calling because they feel like it's going to help them at the moment. But at the end of the day, you putting your calling on hold doesn't bless all the people that you're supposed to bless when you do your calling, you do your work. But all right, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. I feel really passionate about that. And also too, I'm a non-traditional minister, so it's like, I have pastored, but most of my work has been creative or in leadership in this way. So it's like my pastoring doesn't look the same, or like or in chaplaincy. So that's where my pastoral work has been, but. There isn't even a path, like not a direct path in my denomination for people who have those kind of options. And I really think that it's important for us to really kind of start using our imagination more. And that's why children are important. Children use their imagination all the time.
Yeah, they do. And I think that there's so many different paths that we can create, because, even just thinking about what we were talking about a little earlier, where's the path for people who want to be in political office? Like, that's where they feel they've been called to serve. Like, what are we doing to aid them in developing that ministry? And there's just so many opportunities that I feel like we have that we're just, as you said, not using our imagination to think bigger than just the pulpit or what happens inside of the sanctuaries. And this pandemic, ironically, is exposing that we have the opportunity to reimagine or rethink or whatever word people want to use, but just to do this differently. But I don't want to keep you all day, because
I know, because we could talk forever. We can chat.
This is just like regular conversation for us. But share with us, just any parting words that you have for someone who's on the fence about voting, who's on the fence about just like being involved because of how toxic everything is right now. Like, what do you have to share with them to just kind of encourage them that, we need their vote and their voice?
Right. The first thing I would say is, especially if you're hearing a lot of chatter, turn the chatter off.
Mm.
You don't have to, I mean, I laughed at Black Twitter all morning. You do not have to laugh at Black Twitter all morning to find out what's going on. You don't have to be on social media. I know even we're broadcasting social media. This will be able to be replayed. I have
Right.
learned that you can sign up for stuff and be like, I will not be there live, but on the weekend, I will catch up with it and I will handle it when I get there. So it's okay to diminish the chatter.
Mm-hmm.
It is okay to do your own research and make your own decisions.
Yeah.
List out all your pros and cons. And some of you will find across the board that some you will side on both sides with both people on some issues. And
Yeah.
that's okay to say, hey, you know what? Some of my issues kind of align more with this person. And also just kind of think about, though, the ebbs and flows. Like I said, do your research, consider that. But more than anything, outside of just kind of taking some time away, outside of just doing your own research, at the end of the day, do preserve yourself. Sit
Mm-hmm.
down, take care of yourself. If you need to early vote because you don't have 5 hours to stand in line, early voting in Georgia starts October 12th, so go ahead and just kind of start thinking about it, and familiarize yourself with the entire ballot. But more than anything, there are also many, as I mentioned about imagination. I feel like I'm saying a lot of parting words. But as I mentioned about imagination, you can also, there's more than just the presidential election that's on the ballot. There are other things that really do involve your community. And so take some time out to really kind of say, what, instead of going, have a natural stop with COVID, take a look around and imagine what you really want for your community and what works best for the community and the space that you're in. And it's okay to kind of think about what you want it to look like for the next 10 years, even if it doesn't reflect it right now. You got a little power. You can do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today, and thank you for your friendship.
Thank you. It's always good to see you.